Okay, we are live. Hello, Helen. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So today is Healing Tuesday, and we talked about several weeks ago having a conversation around phantom emotions, which we've talked about several times, and I think it was a really wonderful concept that it is very can be very transformative and helpful for people to dive in and learn a little bit more about. So, why don't I have you go ahead and let us know a little bit about the concept and yeah.
Okay, so um, I sort of borrowed that term and shifted a little bit. There's something that's called phantom limb syndrome. And with phantom limb syndrome, let's say you had a diseased leg and it had to be amputated, but you would find even when the leg wasn't there, you'd feel pain. Um, and you have a reality check because even though you're feeling pain as if it's in your leg, you know that your leg isn't there. And that's because there are cells in the brain that learn and memorize the pain. So even if there isn't a leg anymore, those cells can get triggered. Um,
Mm,
as I said, you have that reality check. It must be something in here because it's not my leg down there.
mm,
The problem is that nobody teaches us that we also have phantom emotions, that there are cells in our brain that remember pain and trauma, usually from childhood. But when they get triggered, we don't have that reality check. It's like, oh, I feel this dread in my body. I feel this anxiety. And so
mm-hmm.
we have all the sensations, and then we say, and then we believe that it's real. And then we have this kind of loop where we might have a thought that would trigger the phantom emotion. We might have a feeling that gets triggered. And then the thoughts and the feelings cycle around each other. So the more you feel anxious, the more your brain creates anxious thoughts. The more your brain creates anxious thoughts, the more you produce chemicals and sensations of anxiety. So we get stuck. And again, because nobody tells us that we can have all those feelings without anything really happening, we believe it, and then we get locked into those states, which is very painful and very debilitating.
Yeah, without having the awareness of where that originated from, because a
No,
lot of the work we've done is from childhood and things that are still affecting us in our day-to-day life. I just, as you were talking about this, I thought of this weekend. I had two friends that were staying with us, and they decided to leave a day early, and I almost could have seen how in the past some of like abandonment issues were going to be
right.
triggered, and it was really interesting that I was cognizant of what that emotion and that sensation was, and realizing, oh, this is actually not real.
That's right.
This is not, they're not abandoning me, or it's like I understand I'm getting triggered, and I can walk back from that and kind of like identify and release that.
Right, and if we connect this to something else, um, we have a wonderful brain, but it has enormous limitations. And one of the limitations is that the brain is wired to conserve energy, and the way it can conserve energy is by not changing. So I remember
Mm,
having a woman in her 70s come into my office, and she said, um, she was very anxious because she just left her third husband. And then she said, and I have abandonment issues because when I was a baby, my mother went to the hospital. So her
mm,
mother's going to the hospital did trigger abandonment for an infant, but her brain memorized that. And then whenever
mm-hmm.
there was any discord in her relationships, she went into that. Sorry, sorry,
New York City.
New York City. As Ramdas said, take that energy and move it up your spine. It's just energy. So,
Mm.
so
And how much she brought into those relationships,
what?
that if she carry it, and how
Yes.
much of that she was carrying into those relationships and how it impacted
Oh, and
that dynamic.
the interesting thing is that she said to me, "I have abandonment issues, but I left my husband." right? So she's the one who
Oh,
left
wow.
him. And yet, see, when we're children, we do feel like victims because we're so little and our parents are so big. Um, and that's also an identity that gets wired in, so that even though she was the one who precipitated a separation, she perceived it as if she was the victim of his leaving her.
Mm. So
So,
I think so. How would one, and not to skip ahead a bit, but for somebody who's watching or seeing this concept maybe even for the first time, how would you be identifying when you're what a phantom emotion is or when you're feeling it? Is there a way that you can
that's
test
a
for
great
that?
question. The question is, do I have any evidence? If I look
Mm,
around me, do I have any evidence? So here you have a woman who's competent, um, financially secure, and yet she's going to tremendous anxiety as if she's in some kind of danger. But
mm,
there is no. She's safe. She might be lonely, and she might be sad that her relationship wasn't one that she wanted to keep. But we need to check out to see if, just like you can check out with the phantom limb, oh no, there's no leg there. But we want to check out and see if our objective circumstances match the subjective feeling, because
mm,
um, we usually rely on the subjective as the truth because it's in my body. I'm feeling it. How can you tell me it's not real? You can have all those
mm,
feelings, and they have nothing to do with objective reality. Did that make sense?
mm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I think we talked about that a little bit last time, when we talked about at times you can't trust your mind or what you're feeling at that moment, and to dive into where that's originating from. So, like you're saying, is that subjective? Is that really happening, and is there
is
evidence?
that objective? Even though I'm feeling it, does it match external reality? Even there were times when, um, oh, people confabulate. They don't get a text from somebody that they want to date or whatever, and they go right into abandonment and rejection, as if the person might not just be busy.
Right.
And so
Which,
and so the brain creates all kinds of dramatic stories because the brain is very immature. Um,
mm,
and we have a brain, as I call it, um, that's wired for survival, but not for my new word, thrival.
mm,
So we want to move into the thrival. We want to be able to thrive, and we can't thrive if we're always being triggered into um, past trauma and melodrama. Because if I was that woman, right, and I say I feel abandoned, or even listen, try say I feel abandoned. What is that triggering you?
I feel abandoned.
Okay, what do you feel like when you say you're abandoned?
I actually I don't actually feel that much from that, actually. Um, I think we've also done a lot of work on that space, and I really identify when I'm feeling those feelings. So, I feel abandoned. Is
If
that,
you, what would it be
I
like if
guess if
you were really feeling abandoned?
I was really feeling abandoned, I guess it would be more of a sadness and a loneliness if I was feeling that.
And when we're feeling abandoned, again, since we learned that feeling when we were dependent children, we'd be feeling weak and small,
Mm,
which is different from saying, "Yeah, I feel really disappointed that this relationship didn't work out." You can be an
mm,
adult that's disappointed, but you can't be an adult that's abandoned because adult abandoned brings up small, vulnerable, childlike feelings.
mm. Yeah, and there's so many, it feels like, programs or traumas or incidents when at childhood that take some working through. So, and I know it's obviously easier if you have somebody one-on-one that you're working with, but how does somebody really start to unravel and identify some of these traumas when they were young? Um, when they're just going about their normal day?
Well, again, if you check objective reality, but another way of doing it, and you'll recall it, I'm sure, from the work that we did, okay? One of the ways to get over being triggered into those childlike states is to really experience yourself with the power that you have now. So if you can feel an area where you feel competent or you feel peaceful, we all start out as infants feeling peaceful. So if I'm using the example of the woman I mentioned, so she was a peaceful baby, and then her mother got hospitalized and she went into drama because it was dramatic for her. What we're trying to do, we've all had things that took us out of that innocent, peaceful, easy place that we were as infants. What the work that we're doing is, oh, I lost you. Oh, the work that we're doing is to get us back to that peaceful place. So I suggest that if you want to get out of the drama, that you do meditations that create a desirable experience. So it could be being, if you're feeling lonely, can you imagine being with a childhood pet that you felt unconditionally loved you, that you felt love for? And usually when people really enter that experience, they feel warm, they feel a smile on their face, they feel like their shoulders come down and they're relaxed. That's the state we want to get back to. That's the state, as I said, that we were born into, and then our conditioning life experiences take us out of that state. So if you want to, it takes some work to change the program, the hardwiring. Because if you felt abandoned over and over again, and you had, like the experience you had this weekend, you had it many times in your life when somebody didn't return a text or somebody canceled a plan or whatever, you're actually reinforcing that trauma every time you think about it, every time you remember what happened. And one of the reasons that I'm developed my own work and sort of moved away from the kind of training that I had is that when people talk about their trauma, it becomes, this is me, this is who I am this traumatized person. And then I would see it in group therapy situations where people would go into their trauma and they'd feel despair or sadness, and then people in the group would comfort them, and then it became a way to connect. But it keeps you connecting through people feeling sorry for you, and maybe getting the things from people today that you didn't get as a child, the recognition for your suffering. The problem is you're not a child now. And if you get childlike needs met, then you're going to stay as a child, where I could have compassion for somebody who's telling me something traumatic about their childhood, but I don't want them to re-enter that experience, because they'll just reinforce it. What we do in our work is, if you say to me you're feeling abandoned, then and you might be telling a story about some trauma from your childhood. Now the way we work is we say, okay, now forget the story, because you don't want to keep reinforcing it. Now go inside and feel the sensations of abandonment. Usually you feel them deep in your gut. And then I would suggest just breathe into those feelings and those sensations. They're not emotions, they're sensations, and bring them up. And one good image to use is, imagine that you're an infinite blue sky. And now some sensations of abandonment, or some sensations of loneliness, or whatever it is. So just breathe into them. Don't label them as good or bad. There's no such thing as a good feeling or a bad feeling, or good sensation or bad. It just is. And what happens is, when we're children, when we have a lot of pain, like abandonment, we suppress it. And then we lose a connection to ourselves. Sometimes we get symptoms, physical symptoms, or we can get depression, or anxiety because we're trying to keep something down that was too much for us to handle as a child, but could be easily released as an adult. And when I was talking about our brain having many limitations, one of the limitations is that we learn our relationship to our emotions when in the context of us being helpless, vulnerable children. So if you feel abandoned or sad for a long period of time, it would overwhelm you. You would get depressed, or you get very withdrawn, and that would keep you from doing your schoolwork or playing sports. So it's a coping mechanism or a survival mechanism to suppress feelings that would get in our way. The problem is that, and one of the hard parts of changing is that we learned, oh, in some way, not cognitive, this is keeping me going, suppressing this sadness. But what I always say is that what was our survival mechanism as a child becomes our Achilles heel as an adult. Because
Oh, wow.
because right now you're strong enough to let any sensations come through. And if you keep suppressing them, you're suppressing your own power and you may be creating symptoms. I remember having a young woman come in and she said, every night I break out in hives. I've gone for acupuncture sessions. Nothing gets rid of the hives. And so we explored some things, and she had a very angry, bullying kind of father, and she had a lot of rage, but she was afraid ever to express anger, and then she became a very nice, caretaking person. So all this rage was being held in. So I just worked with her to let the rage come up, not because she needed to be angry, she needed to release the sensations. And and I know I've done this myself, it's like, oh, I would be afraid. I want to be a compassionate person. How can I feel rage? And then the rage comes up. The first time it came up, I said, I feel like the Hulk. I felt wham.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And so she felt the strength. And 9:43 that night, I got a text from her. I don't have hives tonight, and they never came back.
Oh, wow.
So
Well, I want to go back just for a second because I love that one imagery or visualization, and we've talked about it, and I've seen you talk about it in groups, is when you're feeling an emotion or you're feeling something that may be triggering, picturing that you are the infinite blue sky, and that feeling of loneliness or sadness is a cloud covering that can dissipate and moves through.
and nothing
And
to
that
be
just
afraid
feels so
of.
expansive, nothing
That's
to be
right.
afraid of.
That's
And
right. Yeah, because when we get afraid, we're contracted, and what we're working on is the expansion, so that we can feel
yeah,
our infinite potential, our power, our strengths, but not. And I know you'll understand this. I hope everybody else. Oops, I lost you.
I can still see you.
Oh, you can. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that we can feel our own strength and our own power in an enlivening way, and it's not an egotistical thing. When I felt like the Hulk, I wasn't like I'm better than anybody else. The
Right.
ego is just a false sense of power. The
Right.
the ego
Well,
doesn't really feel powerful.
what I have appreciated the most, and I think is why I wanted to start having these conversations and sharing all this like beautiful wisdom, if you will, is that the kind of what I've experienced a lot of and majority of is just this peace and ease when we
Right.
talk about like what is the end goal, so to speak, and what is the ideal is to be more than less in a state of peace and ease and flow.
Right.
And that has just been so much more part of my daily life. And so I do really feel like by doing the work, as you said, and it's not easy to overcome the programming and face all of that and just really lean into those sensations. You really can get to a place of more peace and ease, and without allowing and at least recognizing where a lot of these triggers and past trauma come from, and what your reactions up until this point have been to that.
Right.
So I think yeah.
A lot of the time, people spend a lot of energy trying to understand, like, why do I feel this way, and what happened to me, and they spin around in their mind, when in reality it doesn't matter why you're feeling anxious. If you can liberate the feelings and get back to the peace, what difference does it make?
Right.
And,
Right. And it's really identifying your state. And I love that too, is that it's really kind of practicing being in the desired state. If it's in a loving state, if it's in a expansive state, and if it's a joyful state. But and I know that's been helpful for me too, is in the morning and certain times of the day, and just kind of being attentive to what state I'm in.
right. Yeah, it's a matter of practicing, because the fearful patterns got hardwired in when we were very young, and it feels like that's us, because we can't remember a time when that wasn't there, because we don't have a memory of being an innocent, peaceful infant. But what's interesting to me,
Right.
we don't remember it, so it's not as
No.
if we remember, oh yeah, and then this started to happen and that started to happen. It feels like that's who I am. So the more we can practice these states, because we all want to feel peaceful, and we all want to feel love, and we all want to feel joy. And there's an expression I use, and I know you've heard me say it, that every behavior has a positive intent. So, and by that I mean every behavior has a goal that would be good for you. You may not be able to reach that goal. So if I ask somebody who's really hard on themselves and very self-critical, and say, okay, so what's your positive intent, the part of you that criticizes you? Well, if I criticize myself enough, then I'll mobilize, then I'll work hard, then I'll be successful. Okay, and what will you feel when you're successful? I can rest, then I'll feel peaceful. So what will you feel if you lose 20 pounds? What will you feel if you have cosmetic surgery? What will you feel this, and what, no matter how complicated the behavior is, the goal is always to feel peace. We want to feel that we're okay, that we're lovable, and that we can rest, and we don't have, but we live in a culture that says it's outside of you. You'll feel better about yourself if you make more money than the people you know. You'll feel better about yourself if you're more beautiful. You will feel better about yourself if you're smarter. And that is for sure conditional love. And what we really want is just to feel that we're lovable however we are. That we're good and worthwhile and lovable. Otherwise we feel shameful and inadequate, which is extremely painful.
Yeah, and we've done those visualizations and those exercises where what really is just envisioning yourself, like if it is, when we've gone through the exercises, working to get this X, Y, and Z or be here. If you put yourself into that state and you're visualizing it in your mind, you're closing, and you feel what that's like, and you think what it's like to be at that moment,
Right.
you really do, like, a relaxation comes over your body, and you realize you can have that anytime. You can have that now. It doesn't need to be
right.
when this happens, when I get a partner, when.
Like it's
It's
out
now.
there. Yeah.
It's
So
out there.
what we're doing is our brain is trying to help us by remembering past trauma and then project it into the future, so that we don't have a present where, if we really want to go back to the past, go back to our original state, which is peaceful and loving. And one of the things we know about the brain, there was an experiment where they were doing what they call brain mapping, like see what part of the brain is responsible for different activity. And they found a part of the brain that was larger in pianists. So it was a part of the brain that controlled finger movement. So when the pianist moves the finger a lot, that part of the brain goes bigger. So they took people and they did various experiments, but one of the experiments was that for a particular amount of time, they asked people to imagine they were playing the piano, but never move their fingers. not move them at all. And you know what? Just by imagining it, the brain grew larger. So
Wow.
the brain can't tell whether you're doing something or
Mm,
fantasizing doing it. So that's why there's so much power in doing these kinds of visualizations. Because when
mm,
if you can grow a part of your brain larger by imagining moving your fingers, when you're imagining being peaceful or lying on a beach or being with a pet, you're producing serotonin, dopamine, endorphins. So you're training your brain to do the things that people take medication for. So
mm,
you're
mm.
developing your own capacity to heal, and then you're developing the neural pathways for those feel good chemicals to travel on. And that's good news, but there's better news that while you're doing that, you're dissolving the patterns for anxiety and fear and shame.
Because you can't feel both at the same time. You're going to be
They're mutually exclusive.
right, right. I love that. I mean, the fact that you're creating your own healing is
You're
such
creating
a
your own healing.
incredible concept that I never, really fully like understood or felt until we did a lot of our work.
And
So I appreciate that.
what's very exciting too is then when I teach this work to children, they don't have all the years of patterns wired in. So, oh, I can. Oh, let me do this more. Oh, this feels so good. And it's like they have
Mm,
they're in touch with that drive for mastery to be the best you can be. And when you show them a way to feel better, they just eat it up. A lot of adults do,
mm,
but as adults, we're always working against the hardwired patterns that take us to other places.
mm. Wow. Yeah, I can imagine kids would be, they don't have the limitations in a way that thinking some things aren't possible. So you can
And they also don't have
probably get through to them
they
quickly.
don't have the what I call the learned hopelessness. I tried so many things and I never felt better. I went to 12 step, I went here, I went there, and I still have the same stuff. So then there's a part that says, don't trust this because you'll be disappointed. But children
Mm.
don't have that history.
All right, right. Well, we can keep talking, I'm sure, because we talk for hours on end. But I also want to make sure we're thoughtful of our time here, and we're
Right.
going to be continuing on. So thank you so much, Helen, for taking the
My,
time out today and
my
sharing as you
pleasure.
always do.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye
Okay.
bye.
Bye bye.